Welcome to Deeper with Darshana, where we skip the small talk and dive down into what's raw and real. Pleasure, shame, justice, power, healing, liberation. These essential aspects of our human experience are among my favorite topics to explore, and I'm inviting you to join me. I'm your host, Darshana Avila, somatic sex and trauma expert and creator of the Erotic Wholeness Method. It is my belief that we are erotic by nature, and our erotic nature encompasses so much more than you might realize. Come along as I drop into curious conversations with other passionate pros and sensual seekers, and occasionally share musings of my own. Bring your curiosity, your sacred, messy, beautiful humanity, and all the parts of yourself. And let's go deeper together. Welcome back to Deeper with Darshana. And today our conversation is with Monique Castro, who is the founder of the Indigenous Circle of Wellness. Monique herself is a Navajo and Mexican woman who grew up with a really strong matriarchal and matrilineal influence in her life. And we got into a whole conversation about the real distinction between that and the patriarchal norms that many of us are living inside of, and how important it is to weave Indigenous core values of relationship, reciprocity, respect, redistribution, and responsibility toward healing into our lives, whatever our nationality, our ethnicity, our lived experience. It was such a pleasure to be in conversation with her. I love her groundedness and her generous spirit, and I know you will too. Enjoy. Welcome back to Deeper with Darshana. Today, I am going to be in conversation with Monique Castro, who is a licensed marriage and family therapist of Navajo Mexican descent. She is the founder and CEO of Indigenous Circle of Wellness, a thriving multi-site psychotherapy and wellness practice across California. And her work and her mission are rooted in culture and community. Indigenous Circle of Wellness centers the healing of Black, Indigenous, and people of color through therapy, wellness circles, and leadership development. And I am so honored to get to be in conversation with you, Monique. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
And we just had our little pregame and talked about 15,000 different topics that we would be excited to go into. But let's start with just a framing of what is the Indigenous Circle of Wellness and what does it mean to return to Indigenous ways of healing?
Yeah, such a great question. So, Indigenous Circle of Wellness is really like the name of it, right? So, a circle of wellness, a place where folks can really connect back to their indigeneity from all across the globe, right? And a space for healing. So we know that many of our communities have been impacted by colonization, by removal, whether forced or otherwise. And there's been a lot of trauma within our communities. So Indigenous Circle of Wellness is really a place for folks to be fully who they are and bring in their Indigenous knowledges, their wisdom, their practices into a space where they can really feel held and supported and or reconnect, because we also know some folks have unfortunately got disconnected from their indigeneity for various reasons. And so Indigenous Circle of Wellness is a place of healing and wellness for folks now and for our future generations. Mm-hmm. And our approach to wellness is really meeting folks where they're at. It's a relational approach to services. It's a way of connection and kinship. It's really aligning with our Indigenous core values of relationships, reciprocity, respect, redistribution, and our responsibility of healing, and to also move that healing forward for now and into the future. So it's like the circle, it's circular. It's about being inclusive of all people and the thriving futures of our communities.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, what I'm hearing is fundamentally it's very collectivist in nature, mm-hmm. Even when an individual has their own personal journey that they're on, and attending to a wider sense of relationship and belonging is really mm-hmm. integral. And I'm curious, you use the word kinship, which is a word I use often in love. And I'm also
Mm.
imagining there might be people listening who don't actually get that word, maybe have never even heard that word. Can you explain kinship?
Yes. So in its most profound way, it's that we're all related. We're related to one another. We're related to the plant beings, to the various creatures that inhabit our earth, the wind, the elements. It's that we all are interconnected. And so it is the understanding that there is a deep relation between all of us.
Yeah.
And and so when we see each other and the world in that way, it's a worldview and a way of being, the way in which we relate to one another is very different, versus seeing people as distant relatives or strangers. Kinship is really about the deep relationship that we're all related.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, the phrase that I often use is that it's a more than human world that we
Hmm.
humans just happen to be living in. And
Yep.
and I particularly like more than human as opposed to other than human because humans at the top is the ethos that a lot of our westernized colonial culture has perpetuated, and we're seeing now more than ever the million ways that that is harming us, harming the environment, harming place, and
Hmm.
this idea of belonging and kinship and relations as really being egalitarian is what I'm hearing you describe.
Hmm.
You can't help but move through life differently when that's your perspective. Anything about your, and this is obviously what you grew up with as an inheritance, but I'm curious how that has shaped you and informed the choices you've made and this path that you've taken to serve your community as you do, like rooted in the idea of we are all related.
Yeah. So, I think as a young person, it wasn't something that I would say quite had the language for, but just an understanding. It was like a way of being is that you respect one another, you are kind to one another, and you respect all beings, right? So even as a small child growing up with my grandparents, it was an understanding that are we need to be in good relationship with people and all beings, and so that just continues to be a part of who I am. So I didn't know anything different, and also I would say like how that even showed up in our family dynamic is a whole family is like we're very close. It was always really important for us to not just know like are each other in the household, and I also lived in a multi-generational like home, but it's like it's important to know all of our relations, both extended and close, as well as like knowing the people who are in your community and showing up for them and supporting them. So there's just, oh my gosh, there's stories upon stories of ways that looked for our family. But I can give you a quick little reference. And so every year around holiday time, a lot of folks come together. They come together for food and just being together in different spaces. And my grandmother and grandfather always make sure there was more than enough like food for the family and anyone else that just happened to come in. And honestly, this was like just on a regular basis. And it's not because we definitely didn't have like top chef kind of prepared meals, but we definitely always had food, and we had that with an abundance of like if we have guests, there's always going to be food for them. And so when I think about like seasons where there is time where celebration and we want to make sure others are also included. I remember as a kid, my grandmother, like, we have relatives and not actual like blood relation, but we have relative people in our community who don't have much, but we're going to go out and we're going to like take them food. And this was like on a regular basis. It wasn't just like seasonally, but I know that was when we would do it even more often. So it's just a lot of like redistribution and like giving and also an invitation within our home. So the way that also looked with like my family members, I have a lot, my uncles, my dad, everyone, they had a lot of friends. And so everyone to this day, they're like, oh yeah, mom and dad Castro, mom and dad. It's because there was like a whole it goes like a family, extended family. Um, so just deep relationships and caring for others, whether that was making sure there was also food for folks that were our neighbors who we knew might be alone, whatever it might be, there was always like a caring for others. Yeah, there's just so many ways. I'm sorry, am I getting flooded with memories right now?
Well, good. Enjoy, savor the memories. And I know that there's some in particular, we were speaking about earlier, the fact that your tribe and your tribal ways are matrilineal and matriarchal, and how much that has shaped your worldview and your life and your mission and service. And so I would really be excited to dive into that one, because I'm a fuck the patriarchy girl over here. And I know I'm not alone. And I know that there are plenty of people listening who feel the same way. And yet, many of us don't really have an example, don't have a role model of a different way of being, because even if our own ancestry and indigeneity might have at one time been more matriarchal, many of us, myself as an Ashkenazi Jew, like I'm very severed from my inheritance that way. I would love to hear you talk about what it was like to grow up with that as something. Would you say intact? Is that accurate to say that it was intact in your upbringing?
I would say it was pretty intact. But not without challenge, right? Because we're still very much live in this like Western world that is patriarchal. So it's like kind of, but I'll say it was intact in our home. At least when I was a kid.
Hey, that's so you're getting.
So, just to share a little bit on my Navajo side. So Navajos, or Dene, how, or we say Navajo in our language is Dene. In our community, it is matriarchal and matrilineal. And I grew up with my grandparents, my Navajo grandmother and my Mexican grandfather. Now, if you take those two cultures, Navajo is matriarch and matrilineal. The Mexican side is mostly it's patriarchal and mostly just patriarchal and I don't know if it's, well, it could be patrilineal as well, but so there's just knowing that that did exist, right? And that's where I say like it was mostly intact, because when growing up, I have heard stories my grandparents had shared with me how difficult it was early on in their relationship because of those conflicting kind of cultural norms, where my grandmother coming from a matriarchal society to marrying a man who's patriarchal. And so they had some early on clashes, right? But to my grandfather's, sharing, he's like, I learned real quick that your grandmother was the boss, and she knew what she was talking about. And when I pushed back, she wasn't going to be submissive about it. She's like, no, like this is how it's going to be. So very early on in their relationship, even though they had some challenges on kind of navigating that, they did come to the understanding that it's grandma at that, she wasn't grandma yet, but my grandma, they had an understanding that it would be going in the way that grandma wanted things to go, right? And then not in this like bossy way, although we could get that title of like being bossy. It was like, no, she knows, and like her wisdom is really important for our family, and so therefore like that was upheld, right? So
And I'm going to interrupt you for a quick second, if I may, because I think that that's such an important point of emphasis. We get the kind of characterization of bossiness and all that comes along with that, like bitchiness, bossiness, nagging, demanding. But where I'm hearing you go is a recognition of your grandmother carrying an inheritance of wisdom that was invested in her through that matrilineal and matriarchal and culture. And that's a very different way of leading, whether we're talking about leading in family, leading in community, leading in business. So just wanted to kind of like make point of emphasis, because I think for many of us listening, that's a paradigm shift. To see it as wisdom, not just, oh, there goes the woman doing her thing. Like, no, this is like a deep embodied wisdom. So please continue.
Yeah. Yes. And so, and the way that showed up early on in the relationship was in various ways. Very early on when they first got married, like they moved back to the Navajo Nation. They got married in Ogden, Utah, while my grandfather was on the Air Force Base. And when my oldest auntie was born, they moved back to the Navajo Nation. And part of that is because she needed to be with her family. So in Navajo way, you go with the woman's family. When a child is born, you stay within this woman's line. You get support from the family unit of the woman or the birthing parent, right? And so that was also a little different, I'm sure, from my grandfather's more Mexican line of like, no, as the father, you're responsible when you have to take on everything, and you protect your family, and we don't ask for that much help outside. This is just at least from what I've experienced in with different family units and how that looked. And so grandpa shared with me, yeah, we went back because that's where she needed to be with her family. And my grandfather ended up getting stationed in France, and so it was made sense that she was obviously with her family. She had that support. So fast forward, through their life and everything, and they eventually moved to Los Angeles. They moved to Los Angeles during the relocation era, and so like the mid to like late 1950s, and then they ended up settling here in the Los Angeles region. And even in that, my eldest aunt was born in back on the reservation, and my family moved out here after I think they had 2 children. So my father was born out here in the Los Angeles area. And I'm trying to get to like, what is my point of sharing?
So you're giving us a little bit of the feel for their movements and the mic.
Yeah, so there's movement, and I think the point with this is that the movement happened because my grandmother was okay with it, and so she was able to see, again, really using that wisdom. What does this mean for our family, right? And I share that because my grandfather knew that decisions were going to really be finalized by grandma. He can have an idea, but she had to have that buy-in, or else it wasn't going to happen. And that's because she had a great thought process behind things and understanding, well, what does this mean for our family, and what's the plan, and so forth, right? So he trusted her, and she trusted him, and they made that decision to come to Los Angeles together. Now, what that looks like in me growing up, because I was raised with them, and I was raised with them and by them, is that they shared a lot of responsibility together. They showed up for one another, but it was usually led by how grandma felt things should go, and then grandfather then supported her in that process. So that's different than I think a lot of folks have. My grandmother had a lot of the decision making on the family structure, how things were going to go, what was going to how were certain decisions made, the conversations even around money. Like they always did things together, but she had final say in a lot of that.
Locating this story again in chronological time, that would have been even more outside the norm in the 50s and the 60s, when things in the dominant culture were deeply patriarchal, and women in many ways were subservient second-class citizens, even in their homes and with their families. So this is like a huge departure from the westernized norm.
I was born in 86. So in that time, I grew up into a family like this, right? Where my grandmother and my grandfather supported one another, like in decision making, but finalized things. So I grew up in this like matriarchal home environment. So I didn't know anything different. Honestly, it wasn't until I went to like college and I was like, oh, people do things differently, right? So in my years, I'm like that it was a little bit of a culture shock to me, because everything was very much in this matriarchal way. And when we would go home back to the reservation, it was the same way. So this is the community that I was mostly in relation with as growing up, was my Navajo side. And so people also like, well, you don't know too much, at the time, didn't know so much about my Mexican side. I'm like, well, that's because my grandmother made it a point to ensure that we had a deep connection to our Navajo side. And of course, as mentioned, if it's matriarchal, she's going to make sure that's happening, right?
And I'm curious, because I know you're going to go in a million delicious directions. I'd love to hear an example of that college culture shock for you. Like, is there something that stands out as like, whoa, this is a wild departure from how I have been raised and what I've been acculturated to? Like, what was something you bumped up against?
Well, there was a lot of things. I would say, okay, so in college life, when it comes even to the classroom setting, it was like what voices were being heard, or even like when group work was done. I'm a natural born like leader, and I say I'm just being a Navajo woman, right? So you're like, oh, you're such a natural born leader, but if you meet any of the women in our family, we're all leaders.
Uh-huh.
But that's, I think, has a lot to do with how we were raised. So it wasn't like we're all natural leaders, and like it was very much upheld. And there's a lot, I have all, except for one cousin who was the youngest, we're all women. So now with that, we're all very strong women, and when you live in a home and your family is like always lifting that up, we're naturally going to lead in any space that we're at. So how that showed up in college is when I would get some friction with some classmates who want to, this little friction, because they might have been in a home in their own communities where their voices were more important.
Right.
And so they were not used to being in like a debate or a conversation with another strong woman so young too, right? So a lot of us will build our voices later on in life, but I didn't have that issue. So that was interesting in those like kind of like school setting dynamics. And then dating was another one. I was like, oh no. So I had some issues with some dating because I was like, that was a thing. Now, I remember dating in high school. My high school boyfriend and we started dating when we were like sophomores. So we went through high school together. I say like we grew up together, right? And so he was very much a part of my family. I was a part of his family. Like our families like knew each other and like talked. So there was an understanding, right? And so even like years later, I remember we're no longer dating. He's like, you're like you're a pretty strong, like, tough one, because I was very opinionated. I had like a big voice. I made sure I was heard. And so I didn't know any other way. So what for me was like a culture shock is like when I'm just showing up the way I showed up in this relationship that I had in high school, and these relationships that I've had in my friendships and my family, and then you go into a space that is different, you become the oddball in a lot of ways, like, you know um which I was okay with that too. And so I was like, well, this is just who I am. But it was interesting in the various ways. But I always held like leadership roles and different involvement in things where I just naturally was in like leadership spaces, because I think because of how I was raised in a lot of ways. Like I don't know any other way.
I mean, having met you before, I could say that you strike me as a woman who suffers no fools. And your power, to me anyway, in our limited knowing of each other, is you have a very deeply embodied, it's like it's not loud or flashy for the sake of being loud or flashy. I actually experience you as someone who's very subtle, but that does not mean you are not like ironclad strong. And I love that about you.
Yeah.
That magnetized me to you. So.
And I would say like that is like Navajo women for you. Like there's like even memes out there about like dating or being with like a Navajo woman is like you can be more grounded, kind of like chill. We're not, and that's not, I don't want to stereotype and say like everyone's personality is this way, but you're gonna see some similarities. But like we're also very strong, and like we have a lot of wisdom, and we are very thoughtful. So I know that very much shows up in our family, and I can at least speak for my personal experience, and the experience of my close relations with my family is like that's very true.
Yeah.
At the times where I see that it might not be present, it's not because it's not there for the other matriarchs in the community. It might be because somewhere it got stunted, and that could have been through the church system, or the various federal policies. It's for survival, and so that's where we might see it not as out, and it's not because it's not who they are, it's because it's been suppressed.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes so much sense. And I mean, even thinking about myself, where I would unequivocally categorize me as a strong woman with major leadership qualities. Also true, I grew up in a home that absolutely did not have a matriarchal structure to it. My mother had pretty extensive like mental illness, and my father was very dogmatic and also doing all the adulting. So I fought to be my strong self, literally. And I came to it like, honed in the fire, going head to head with my dad a lot of the time. And navigating things around my mother not really being able to mother in all the ways that I would have wanted, she would have wanted. So I came to my strength like by the skin of my teeth, as opposed to it being nurtured. And there's a difference in that, like I'm here in my middle years still learning how to be in a softer, quieter version of that strength, and to not feel threatened if my voice isn't the loudest, which it's in effect my own internalized patriarchal norms butting up against that intrinsic, feminine wisdom that wants to come through. And I just hear what a difference it makes when you grew up with that really being just the water you swam in, as it were. Something else that I know you grew up with is an auntie who is two-spirit. And I would love to bridge the conversation in the direction of more expansive understandings of gender. And I just use the word feminine wisdom, and that may be accurate, or maybe half of the equation in speaking about, you having a two-spirit matriarch that is very much a feature in your life. Let's hear more about her. Or that. I don't know how to themselves, but
Yeah, so my auntie, her name is Christina, and I refer to her as Nina. All of us in our family refer to her as Nina. And she is the auntie who I mentioned was the firstborn of my grandparents, and lived her early years on the Navajo Nation, and she is also two-spirit. And she without sharing too much of her own story, because it's her story to share, I do want to acknowledge that like she always knew that she was two-spirit. She didn't have a language at the time or understanding, but knew that she had this like this connection to not just one gender or gender identity, or she just knew early on. And she said that when she shares her experience of this, is that it was really difficult for folks at the time, think of like the 60s, to like kind of that to really fully accept her for who she was. So my grandmother and my grandfather, they had early conversations with her, and they to kind of cut the longer story short, my auntie, my Nina, went back to the Navajo Nation to meet with her grandmother, my great grandmother. And in that conversation, she shared with her what a two-spirit person is, the sacredness of who she is, and how she holds the qualities of the feminine and the masculine, and that she is a very special person who is able to support and really nurture in both, in all roles, and that she should embrace that. So there's more to that story, but nonetheless, it was really profound for my Nina, and for our entire family, because it reminded my grandmother around that part of our indigenous lineage and knowledge, and the sacredness of her own daughter, right? But also for my grandfather, who was very new to like what, it's coming from a community that might not be as accepting. He very much was like, I accept you. And she got a lot of love and support, right, from our family. So I grew up with my auntie, and actually my auntie, she lives in, we have like a multi-generational like living situation. So we have our front house, she lives in our back house. And I'm just so grateful that she lives here. And so that's also how we grew up, right, with having the multi-generational home. And so my auntie has been a huge part of the child rearing of all of us, all of my sisters and cousins, right? She is the matriarch. She is like the one that was in line. Grandma's was the main matriarch. When grandma passed away, Nina is the matriarch of our family, right? So we go to her for guidance, for wisdom. We go to her for where the holiday is going to be, where, you know, what are we going to do for celebration of this birthday? Like, she's the one who we go to for things and get her okay. And so, having grown up with her, I got to learn a lot about Two Spirit. And forgive me for Navajo folks on that might be joining in at some point. I don't know how to say it in Navajo, but I will practice, because there's an actual word for Two Spirit, but the translation is Two Spirit. But when she learned, or has learned more about who she was as she was growing up and into her adulthood, she always made sure to share that with us, and our family was very much in support of her. So I got to experience so many things as a young person, going to like pride festivals with her as a child, and into an adulthood, supporting folks who were friends of mine who were questioning like their identity, and just like having that giving them that connection and supporting them on their journey in some capacity, and then having so many friends now who are also Two Spirit, and just like, you know, it matters when you have that in your home and it's accepted, and then how much you can just again just support so many others and be a really strong ally and relative, right? Like an extended relative. And so yeah, it's been really amazing, and I'm really grateful for her, and that we get to have her, and we're blessed with her in our family, um, and that my son also gets to be raised by her, since she lives very close to us.
That is super special. It has me reflecting my mother's older sister, Mitzi. Two Spirit is not terminology that we used in our cultural inheritance, but I think I would be accurately describing her as a very dykey lesbian, and she always was. And I never knew anything different other than the fact that I loved her madly and she loved me. And I looked to her as an elder, especially in ways that my mother, her sister, was not always able to be. And so even though it wasn't in a intergenerational household or an intact lineage, I really relate to what you're saying about the specialness of being in relationship with someone who is embodying feminine and masculine wisdom and energies with such like fluidity and fluency is a word that I want to use here, where it wasn't a choice to be one or the other because that binary simply did not apply. It was too narrow, something greater than the sum of the parts. And what a privilege it is to grow up with that as part of our formative experiences.
It is a privilege, another privilege, just like being raised in a matriarchal home. Like, I did not know anything else until I kind of left the nest, right?
Yeah.
And then I'm like, oh, people don't accept their relatives. Like, why wouldn't they? Like, it just, to this day, it still just like boggles my mind, like how people can even just not uplift or like love their children or their relatives or friends or all these different things. I'm like, I don't know, because that wasn't my experience. Like, I just couldn't imagine that. So I feel very, very blessed that we, you know, had the type of home that we did. Yeah, it was, and it also makes me really sad for others who don't have that.
Yeah.
You know.
And a lot of people don't, you know, I mean, I could say that I had fractions of it, pieces of it. And we know many, especially in the fierce and rugged individualism of the dominant culture that we live in here in the West, and how isolated we are. And I feel that regularly, you know, like even though I have awareness that it could be different, and I certainly think I'm doing better than many as far as chosen family and community goes. It's a real struggle for a lot of us to create something that we haven't necessarily seen modeled. It hasn't been a part of our lived experience. And maybe this kind of segues us a little bit back to your professional expertise and you know, you're both as a therapist and leading a wellness center and as a leadership coach. How do you encourage and invite people to begin to create more of a sense of belonging chosen family, if not blood family? Like, what are some of the practices or suggestions that you make?
Yeah, there's so many ways that that can be, but more than anything, it's really getting a sense of I'm very much like strength-based approach. I want to like what is working for you, what has been supportive to you as a person for your being, either in the past or currently, and what do you feel might be missing. And interestingly, there's an exercise that I do with a lot of my clients, and even the staff as they onboard, it's like really using the 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 ancient knowledge of like the medicine wheel to understand like wellness, and also like what are the parts of ourselves that we feel very connected to, and what do we feel disconnected to. And what I find, a lot of folks are very disconnected on the spiritual connection. That's usually a large one. Even if they consider themselves a spiritual person, in practice they might not be as deeply connected. And the other one that comes up often is the emotional quadrant. And those two, and then they're all interconnected, right? But those two in particular, I think, get kind of pushed to the back burner because they're not as uplifted in society,
Right.
as valuable. However, I think that is the most value is like in the spiritual realm, in connection. Like, what is the deep connection? What is that heart center at, right? And that's where our intuition is. That's where where we can create. This is where supports our heart. And that's different for everyone, what that can be. And then emotionally, I think we live in a society overall that really like suppresses like our emotions, or like, don't be too emotional, or like, it's not a whatever emotion it might be. Usually it's just like, if you show that you're happy and that's it. But like, if you're angry, or if anything else, like folks either do that in hiding or on their own, versus like in community and in space. So as a practitioner, whether that be therapy or coaching, or as a leader, it's really uplifting like all parts of who we are and giving space to that. So what that might look like as a leader with my team, it might actually be creating spaciousness for our emotions to just connect. Team meeting starts with a prayer. Team meeting starts with someone offering something that they feel very connected to, right? So it's the spaciousness and opportunity to have that, I think, is how, at least how I lead in my company. And then in sessions with clients, it's like, what is that for them, and inviting that in, right? So it's a reconnecting. It's the reconnecting, and the uplifting, versus seeing everything as like from like a deficit. So those are different ways in which like that kind of comes up, and that we have support, myself and our team, like, support folks. And it's not to like give someone thing of mine, it's for me to help them reconnect to something within themselves that might be maybe they haven't been accessing, or that they have not even rediscovered. I say rediscovered because it's there.
Right.
It's just maybe around like, yeah, just kind of getting to know something a little bit more deeply, asking questions, doing some research, right? That kind of stuff. So it's yeah, so I would say that there's more that I could share to that, but I'll pause there and see any questions.
The whole time that you were sharing that, the image that I had was of a little ember and then blowing on it through cupped hands. Like the idea that we are pretty much always, when it comes to healing and wholeness, when it comes to claiming our thriving, it is a reclaiming. It is connection to something that is already intrinsically within us. And maybe we've gotten real far away from it. Maybe we've forgotten it existed, but it does not mean it isn't there. And this is exactly the same thing that I say when I'm speaking about eroticism, that we are erotic by nature, which is to say we are dynamic, vital, creative beings, and sensuality and sexuality are a facet of that, not the only one. And many people that I work with feel very disconnected from that aspect of themselves, but that doesn't mean they aren't erotic, right? And same as what you're saying here, I think we are all spiritual. We are all emotional. This is part of the human experience. whether or not we are really acknowledging those facets of ourselves and encouraging and feeding them, that's a different question altogether.
Yes. Yeah, and even the connection around the like the eroticism or even the intimacy pieces on that spiritual realm as well, like the connection that people have with one another and their spirit, like there's just so much there. And something that like I think could be another conversation around like how is our wellness connected to all of that, and how much of it, yeah, is held back because of what we might have learned. So it's a lot of unlearning. What I like to invite folks into is really like, even if they don't know their cultural lineages, maybe there's been some like a lot of removal or a lot of relocation, just disconnection. I like to tap into, well, what do you feel connected to right now? Like if we're thinking about connection, and I might hear things like food, cooking, music, um, nature, you know? So I'm like, okay, so especially if, so I kind of lean into what am I hearing mostly, or like that stands out. Some folks they might be religious or were religious at one point. They're like, I'm not religious now, but there was something about it that really I felt connected to. Okay, what was it? Like, it was the community. Okay, so it was the people. It was about being around people. It was the music, the songs that were sung. I just enjoyed the music. Okay, so you really love the music. There's something about that. So then we keep on like learning more about those pieces. Then it's like, how do we bring that in without maybe the part that didn't feel fitting for you? Right?
Love that, because it's, to me, as someone who has never really identified as religious but is deeply spiritual, it's reverence, it's love, it is the pouring out of that devotional energy. Like, I get high off of that. It does not need to be channeled in the direction of a particular deity or archetype or figurehead. It's more being in that beautiful like surrender and devotion to life. And that's, for some that might be very woo, and that's just how it is for me. Like, and I appreciate you naming the fact that religion has done a number on a lot of people when it comes to their intrinsic spirituality, and that we have an opportunity to tease those things apart and then reclaim the spirit in a way that works for us, and define it on our own terms and practice in our own ways.
Yes. Yeah. And that is what I would say a lot of healing is around like the what organized religion um has maybe the harm that it's caused, right, in various communities. And it's always complex because it just depends, but it because everyone's connection to what spirit is for them is different. And then also if they are religious, like I want to honor folks too, and if they have a religious like practice, but really coming close or diving deeper into like, well, what is the actual connection, and not the parameters that were put inside, because there's a lot of parameters.
Yeah, there's a lot of dogma and a lot of here's how it's going to be, let me tell you. And what I'm hearing you invite is that whatever someone's personal identification might be on the spectrum of deeply religious, non-religious, spiritual, that it's really about finding what is authentic for you, and that's what matters most.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Well, I agree that we need a part two, because there's a lot to cover today, but this has been just such a rich and delightful conversation to be in, Monique. I so appreciate you. I'm curious how people can learn more about what you're up to in the world, and any ways that they can lean in support of the Indigenous Circle of Wellness. And what you?
So I would say the best place to find us at Indigenous Circle of Wellness will be to follow us on Instagram. So our handle is at Indigenous Circle of Wellness. And from there, you can get connected to our website. You can get connected to all the other socials that we have through there. That's a good starting place, is to connect with us there. If you want to connect with me, that is also a good place to connect with me. I have my personal handle, which is at Monique. It's at MoniqueCastro.coach is where you can find me personally. And So yeah, definitely connect with me on my personal page. It's more of like a blog page, so you get to kind of see what are the things I'm up to. Some photos of my auntie that I talked about, my family members. Like I share a lot of more personal, kind of like what is Monique's life like, kind of sentiment on that. But then on Indigenous Circle Wellness page, it's like all the business things, mostly around how folks can access services with us, both locally and afar, how to partner with us, like all of the different ways to connect.
Awesome. And those links will all be in the show notes. And I know that there's also some free wellness events that you all run on a monthly basis. So we'll make sure to highlight those and please check them out. And Monique, one last question for you. If there's any last little drop, a nugget of wisdom, a deep sourced pearl of something we didn't touch on or that you want to just revisit, what do you want to leave folks with? What is that little gem that you'd like people listening to know?
I would say what I think is super powerful is for folks to reconnect with your own indigeneity. We all come from a place, a lineage, a beautiful lineage, and to connect. And how to connect, because I get this question the next, like, well, how do I do that? Connect with the land. Connect with the land that you originate from, that your ancestors come from, and understand that, right? No matter where you are from around the world. And, colonization has done its number on so many communities. So it's really disconnected us. But when folks are trying to reconnect, we don't need to reconnect through other people's cultures. We can learn and understand, and it can help us, but we don't want to appropriate. So the best way for us to really get connected to our own is to do that work, do that research, do that learning and understanding. And I say the land because the land has so much knowledge and so much wisdom for us. And literally, if you're able to, go to the land in which your community, your family lineage is from, and learn about the plants there, the animals there. Sit with the wind. You'll learn a lot. And if you're not able to physically get to a certain place, research, ask questions, so much is in front of us and we don't access it enough.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Thank you so much. And for those of you listening, if you loved what you heard today, please give us a 5 stars, give us your review, learn more about Monique, and we will be back here again with our next episode soon.